Welcome back to the plenary session of Climate Law and Governance Day 2022 during the COP27 in Sharm El Sheikh, Egypt. It has been a very rich and substantive afternoon and morning, and for some of you, late evening. And we have benefited greatly from the 16 parallel sessions that have been held. If you wished to see one session and you were unfortunately in another one, don't worry. The videos for each session will be lightly edited and sent to you together with some recommended resources, and in some instances, actually launches of books and articles as well. There will also be short video clips of 3 minutes made with the key messages from each session, and they will be shared over social media. This is particularly important for those among our 1,400 registrants who are in different time zones or were unable to connect due to changes in the Egyptian access to internet in Cairo and other cities today. What we would like to be able to do now is to play a short video from the speaker from this morning, Justice Antonio Benjamin, who needs no introduction as winner of the World Commission on Environmental Law Awards in Oslo just recently, and also winner of the Weir-Madri International Justice Awards this year. But as a Justice of the National High Court of Brazil and founder of the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment, he has kindly been a member of our program committee for many years, and we are very, very happy to have him welcoming everyone to this afternoon's session. Judge Benjamin. We'll try one more time with his video. It's a 3-minute video, and he put a lot of effort into ensuring that it could be recorded. So we'll try. Go ahead. I think that we've done our best to make the sound accessible for everyone. And the best, I'm afraid, isn't always good enough. So we will try to make the video accessible to all the participants by sending it to you with a link within the next 24 hours. And it will go not just to those who have joined us in this plenary this afternoon, but to all 1,400 registrants. And I think the good news is that Judge Benjamin is going to be awake soon in Brazil and will be joining us on the closing plenary to speak to us himself as well. So without further ado, I'm very, very honored to pass the chair directly to Advocate Douglas Leys, King's Counsel, who of course was one of the winners of the Global Leadership Award, Climate Law and Governance in Glasgow at the COP26, and Advocate Wendy Miles, King's Counsel, who was one of the winners of the Global Leadership Awards on Climate Law and Governance in the Madrid Santiago COP25. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marie-Claire. Last time Douglas and I shared a co-chairing, we had different names. So you go ahead, Douglas.
Okay, thank you, Wendy, and it's good to be co-chairing with you this afternoon on a subject I know which is dear to your heart and also dear to mine. and that is incentivizing net zero. Incentivizing net zero. And we have with us a very esteemed panel this afternoon who will be taking us through the various ramifications of how we get to net zero and what especially the multilateral institutions are doing. We have, and I suppose, Wendy, we will alternate. We have our keynote speaker who will be Michael Strauss, and I will introduce Michael. Known him for quite a while. Michael Strauss is now the General Counsel of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Prior to that, he was a partner in a Washington law firm. And prior to the law firm, he was with the ADB, where I met him, where he was the executive director for the United States on the ADB's board. And then he went on to the law firm in the US, and now he is the general counsel of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. He also had a stint at the IMF and MEGA, the World Bank. So Michael is well suited to speak to us from a developmental perspective and totally rounded, having been exposed to the private sector and also to the development institutions. So without further ado, I will hand over the floor to you, Michael, so you can take it from here.
Douglas, thank you so much. And it's really a great pleasure to be on the panel with you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm very honored to be a part of this distinguished panel to speak about the EBRD's progress towards alignment with the Paris Agreement. Let me give special thanks to the organizers for this year's Climate Law and Governance Day, and of course, in particular, Dr. Marie-Claire Coronnier-Seger, and to the co-chairs of the session, to you, Douglas, and also to King's Counsel, which I have to get used to saying, Wendy Miles, and King's Counsel yourself, Douglas. It's always a pleasure to be together. Climate change is really one of the greatest challenges of our time, and even that feels like an understatement to say. And now there is broad recognition that it's a systematic source of risk for companies, for financial institutions, and for whole economies. At the EBRD, we respond to this challenge by promoting environmentally sound and sustainable development in the full range of our activities across our countries of operations. That's in Central Asia, Central and Eastern Europe, and the Southern and Eastern Mediterranean. Unique among the international financial institutions, this has been part of EBR's mandate since we began in 1991. And this is the reason that we see low carbon transition as an economic and social opportunity, not merely as a cost to be borne. From an operational perspective, when the EBRD early on developed a set of transition qualities to track the progress in our countries of operations, we defined green as one of these transition qualities and as a key component of the transition to sustainable markets. To drive our green mandate forward, we've adopted a green economy transition, or GET approach, under which we've committed to help build green and resilient economies by doing three particular things. First, aligning our operations with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And that means right away, from January 1st of next year, we will assess each project for alignment with Paris, following our methodologies developed in coordination with the other MDBs, some of you involved on the call. Two, enhancing policy engagement for the development of a long-term low-carbon strategy and greening of financial systems. And three, scaling up investments across a set of priority environmental, climate mitigation, and resilience themes, including energy systems, industrial decarbonization, city infrastructure, sustainable food systems, and green buildings. Under this GET approach, we've set the goal to increase our green financing to more than 50% of our annual business volume by 2025. I'm proud to say that the EBRD, in conjunction with partner MDBs, has embraced its responsibility to address the financing gap for climate mitigation and adaptation by mobilizing climate finance and reporting on annual climate finance flows. In fact, the EBRD's climate finance contribution hit a new record total in 2021 of $6.4 billion as part of the collective climate finance delivery effort of the MDBs. And this means that we met our target 3 years early, which means even more ambition for the future, I hope. Our aim is to catalyze the much bigger financial flows managed by the private sector into low emission and climate resilient investments in emerging markets. The EBRD's work on systemic reform to improve the environment for green investment is helping attract private sector investors who I think really hold the key to the massive volumes of private investment needed to bring about a successful green transition. We are especially pleased to note that every dollar of finance we've provided has leveraged more than $2 of private finance. Moreover, by helping countries formulate climate strategies, by supporting innovative financial instruments and capital markets, by supporting regulatory frameworks such as renewable energy auctions and the implementation of carbon pricing schemes, the EBRD is on track to double its own mobilization of private sector climate finance by 2025, in accordance with our pledge in Glasgow. With all of this as prologue, it's really worth considering where lawyers feature in the climate action effort. At EBRD, lawyers play a key role in structuring and negotiating financial instruments and also help countries in our region develop new policies and legislation, which will in turn unlock opportunities for climate finance. Indeed, the global response to climate change is underpinned by a legal document itself, the Paris Agreement. And under the Paris Agreement, member states have an obligation to communicate their nationally determined contributions. And we're seeing that this has prompted increased policy, legislative, and regulatory activity across countries. Lawyers, in other words, are right in the mix to make Paris happen. And just as we can see where lawyers are essential in our climate efforts, we can also see that the financial professions are getting serious too. The Paris Agreement is now being reinforced by recommendations and emerging regulatory frameworks from influential bodies such as the Financial Stability Board's Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, the Network for Greening the Financial System, the EU Commission's Sustainable Finance Action Plan, and a number of national regulatory and supervisory bodies. And in this context, at the EU level, TCFD requirements are expected to become mandatory as part of the EU's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, while reporting on specific sustainability KPIs may be required through the implementation of the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosures Regulation. Alphabet soup, perhaps, but this jumble of letters is truly the sign of progress. And also, alphabet soup tends to translate into increased legal and regulatory requirements for the private sector. So alongside this, we'll need to provide extensive policy reform support for our clients, including both public and private sector's clients, to deal with this rapidly developing legislative and regulatory landscape. While working with the countries of operations on NDCs and long-term strategies, the EBRD is increasing its work with corporates on transforming their understanding of climate risks and opportunities. Our legal transition team focuses specializes in providing support to policymakers to design and implement legal, institutional, and regulatory reform. And it also provides capacity building and technical support to the private sector to improve climate governance. As a development bank that focuses on the private sector, one of our key priorities is helping companies, these are the clients which we know really, really well, transition to a low carbon future as well. There's a clear shift here from an era where the compliance with climate and sustainability related disclosures was a nice thing to have, to an environment where it's mandatory for the private sector, or at least very critical due to investor and regulatory pressure. Despite this shift, though, as noted a moment ago, there's a significant lack of preparedness for and awareness of climate-related risks among businesses. And this is particularly true in the EBRD's regions. So we see this as an important challenge, but we also see it as a really big opportunity. The gap between the levels of corporate climate governance in developed and emerging markets is large and continues to grow. Companies in emerging markets often have little visibility on what their climate risk exposure might be, but this leaves our clients more exposed to financial risks and increasingly will limit their access to capital and to markets. Beyond this, in the focus on climate-related disclosures, there's also now increased recognition of the need for corporate climate governance practices. Boards can play a crucial role in tackling climate change and developing internal policies and procedures to identify and manage climate risks effectively. This is where the legal concept of fiduciary duty plays an important role. Lawyers must advise and guide private sector boards to ensure they're fully aware of the impacts of climate change as part of their fiduciary duties. EBRD's in-house lawyers have a long-standing experience and expertise in promoting this good governance agenda at national and corporate levels. But now EBRD has developed a cross-practice dedicated capacity building package to help bridge the gap, a donor-funded corporate climate governance advisory facility with a budget of over 25 million euros. This facility brings together EBRD's lawyers and policy experts to support institutional, corporate, and municipal clients to develop and strengthen their governance around climate strategies, and disclosure policies. The aim is to transform the way our clients do business, nothing short of that. Under the facility, we help companies develop credible transition plans. We help them understand and manage climate-related risks and opportunities, and we encourage them to disclose climate-related information to regulators, lenders, and investors using best practice frameworks. We also support them in aiming to access green finance. And as part of the advisory facility, we work closely with companies' boards and senior management. To date, EBRD has extended the support to more than 20 clients in its countries of operations, with many, many more to come. To expand its reach to senior management and boards in its countries of operations, in April, EBRD participated and partnered with the Climate Governance Initiative to promote companies' corporate governance, corporate climate governance. This will include training non-executive directors on climate-related risks and how businesses can boost their board's capacity to lay the pathway towards sustainability. Finally, we have to take a very careful look at the role of law beyond just regulation. Climate challenges inevitably raise key and pervasive issues about justice, about equity, and about responsibility. Climate change threatens the effective enjoyment of a range of human rights, and as a result, we're seeing increased climate litigation globally. It's become a tool for civil society to question the adequacy and enforcement of climate commitments made by governments and the private sector as well, and in some cases even enhance those commitments. And finally, that leads me to our work on the judicial sector. Our experience has shown that the most effective way to support national legal systems and enforcement is through judicial education, training, and information sharing. To quote my good friend, Tom Clark, you ignore the judiciary in this world at your peril, and he's absolutely right. The EBRD's legal transition program has been developing a judicial capacity building project since 2005, and that means that more than 1,300 judges from across the EBRD countries of operations have benefited from those projects. While traditionally we focused on commercial laws such as insolvency and competition laws, I'm really proud to say that we're now developing our first judicial capacity building project on the international legal framework for climate and climate litigation. Our aim is to equip judges with the knowledge and resources needed to adjudicate complex climate-related cases. I hope I provided you with some helpful insight on the EBRD's efforts towards achieving the Paris Agreement and Paris alignment, not just for itself, but also for and through its clients. But let me close by reiterating that it is within our collective power as lawyers and professionals to reverse the worst impacts of climate change. But we need to act now, as so many people will tell you, and importantly, we need to act together. Thanks very much.
Thank you
Okay,
so much.
Thanks for that, Michael. I'm hoping people can hear me. I seem to have had a little interference with my audio, but hoping I can be heard. Yes, thanks for that, Michael. Very wide and all-embracing indication of what the EBRD is doing for incentivizing net zero. I do know we have worked on a couple of projects together, and one of the flagship is a renewable energy project, which is taking place in Egypt. And I hear that that one has been very successful and is being scaled up and replicated across the Egyptian countryside. So congratulations to that. And of course, the admirable Green Cities project, which we are embarking on throughout Central Asia. And I know we are partnering with you on that, and that is really going to reform the whole spectre of cities and how we look at cities for the future. I am going to hand over now to my co-host, Wendy, and you will take it with the next speaker and introduce him. I leave it to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Douglas. I think I was your little interference in your audio, so sorry about that. So I'm here to, thanks so much, Mike. That was so interesting. I'm here to introduce Thomas Clark, who is Mike's counterpart at the Asia Development Bank. So we're gone from, I guess, global north to global south on the MDB side. And Thomas may or may not know this, but we share heritage. We were both partners at WilmerHale, although I don't think at the same time. But I'm excited to know that. So a little like Mike, Thomas is in this wonderful and an enviable position of having been in private practice, and Douglas as well, having been in private practice and now in this GC role in the development bank. And as well in in-house in corporate sector as well at General Electric. So a lot of years, a lot of runs on the board, and something that the listeners may not know that I've learned in dealing with Tom and Mike and Douglas's counterparts is these people all grow up together. So this is a community of lawyers who very much grow up together, and there's wonderful collaboration between these really senior lawyers, which is absolutely fabulous. So we've asked Tom to give us a little bit of a trek through ADB's strategy for aligning with net zero. And Tom, like me, you might have been inspired a bit by some of the things that Michael said. So feel free to enlarge a little bit, including on some of the work that ADB's done in the South Pacific with the judiciary and things like that, if you're happy to do that. So thank you.
Wendy, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And let me, of course, give a very warm greetings and hello from Manila in the Philippines. I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person in Sharm El Sheikh, and really best regards to all of the distinguished members of the legal community, colleagues, dear guests, and friends. You know, in the interest of the short time we have, and following as I do my good friend Mike, it is very tempting to say ditto, amen, and save us all a lot of time and hand it back to you. But that probably wouldn't be giving you your money's worth. But obviously, Mike has very well summed up a lot of the collaborative effort, and it has been truly collaborative effort amongst the international financial institutions and multilateral development banks as we grapple with, well, it is fundamentally, of course, a common problem of our common humanity, which is the existential threat, the triple planetary crisis that we're facing. And MDBs, we all, I think, have acknowledged, have a very critical role to play in that, particularly not just with money, but with capacity building, with knowledge sharing for our DMC clients. And I think that's where we really do have, in our parlance, unique additionality to be able to provide that. And certainly the capacity building efforts with the judiciary that Mike has very well discussed, and which I'll elaborate on a little bit, a part of that. But let me, if I may, Wendy, go back to your question, which I think really gravitates to what we're doing with sort of the net zero. And I think a key part of that, which is how we get there in a just way. First of all, the multilateral development banks have really joined forces, I think, on a number of critical initiatives that I just want to put, you know, a little more maybe detail on from the ADB perspective. And that is, if you kind of just go through the critical path here, we've engaged in a common methodology to track climate finance. So you look at things like the annual joint report on MDB's climate finance, in which each MDB now discloses its individual climate finance volumes for both climate change mitigation and adaptation. And you know, as we've discussed in other contexts, this is so critical because, you know, to quote, you know, Greta Thunberg, you know, things can degenerate to blah, 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 just lots of talk, lots of promises, not action, unless it's measurable. One lesson I learned a lot in the private sector, whether it was at law firms or GE or other places I've been, is that what gets measured is what counts. If you don't measure it, if you don't have a way of quantifying it, it does risk becoming blah, blah, blah. And I think the way that we have approached this is that we really do need to have a common framework for measuring the progress that's being made. Now, the MDB Paris alignment framework is also critical, and I'll talk a little bit about what we've done to institutionalize our alignment with Paris in all of our sovereign operations, and coming very soon in our non-sovereign operations as well. The third area is in the common just transition principles. And, you know, we've said this at Fora earlier today, it bears repeating. All of this requires consensus, political will, political sustainability, the social license to move on climate. And if you do not meet the equation of the just transition, if you do not distribute both the benefits and the burdens of these efforts equitably, if you let particular segments, particularly vulnerable segments, pay too high a price for the transition, you're not going to have that sustainable commitment. So a just transition is absolutely critical to what we're trying to do here. And then I think just the recognition that there is so much intersectionality, and I borrow that deliberately from other contexts where we look at, how to protect the vulnerable. But this isn't just about climate, but it's the effects that climate change have on other issues and the effects that those issues then have feeding back into climate around sustainable economic development. You cannot have sustainable economic development unless you solve for climate change, because climate change is negatively affecting the very populations who are suffering financial exclusion, financial failure to have development goals met. So these two are very much linked. Resilience and biodiversity. Obviously, loss of biodiversity is caused by climate change, and it also fuels more climate change, getting us into a vicious circle. So we need to have a very intersectional approach to how we look at those issues. And I'm very, happy to say that at COP26, the MDBs, as you know, made a joint statement on nature, highlighting these very interconnections among global sustainable economic development, climate change, resilience, and biodiversity. And I would, point you to, I think it's up on the World Bank site, but the statement on nature done jointly with the MDBs, I think is a very important resource to look at the way in which these issues all intersect. Now, in terms of ADB's work as Asia's climate bank, ADB at last year's COP in Glasgow announced its raised ambition for climate change financing for the 2019 to 2030 period from $80 billion to $100 billion. And of that 100 billion, 34 billion has been marked for adaptation. A number of recent examples of that enhanced commitment to adaptation includes just recently a $1.5 billion loan for Pakistan under ADB's Building Resilience with Active Countercyclical Expenditures, or BRACE program, which includes help to promote climate change adaptation following this year's tragic and devastating flooding. In addition, we've made a $250 million emergency grant to strengthen climate and disaster resilience in 22 coastal towns in Bangladesh. It is absolutely important to be providing this resilience assistance so that we can get ahead of these problems and prepare a number of the vulnerable communities that will suffer more and more until we've actually made progress in the mitigation efforts that need to be made as well. Now, it's very easy to look at these emergency programs and say, okay, so you're just, you're doing things as they come up, it's firefighting, but actually mainstreaming climate change into all aspects of our operations generally has been, I think, another indication of the way we're looking at this strategically, not as one-off, but as a here for the long haul way of doing business. Mainstream climate finance has been integrated into all aspects of our operations actually for many years. In 2014, ADB introduced climate change risk screening of its projects with the establishment of the Climate Risk Management Framework. This is a framework that focuses on climate change and risk to the physical integrity, longevity, and performance of a project, and it incorporates adaptation measures into the design of projects at risk. So this is something that is part of the way we do business with all of our sovereign operations. If we look at how we implement these programs, ADB's climate change agenda is implemented through, first of all, portfolio level assignment and alignment with the goals of the Paris Agreement. Secondly, a project level greenhouse gas emission assessment and management. And third, critically, a project level climate risk screening and climate risk and adaptation assessment. So we're looking at the portfolio level, we're looking at project level GHG emissions, and we're looking at project level climate risk screening for other more systemic effects, climate risk and adaptation assessment. By linking all of these together, it ensures that we're actually taking the climate change agenda and making it part of our daily approach to deals. It's not something that's, a one-off or separate, but it becomes part of the normal risk assessment, just like financial viability would be. And that's, I think, the critical thing here is we have to stop thinking about climate as some kind of a special thing that, okay, we're going to put a climate element on or a climate filter on. This is fundamentally part of risk. It's fundamentally part of the viability, the long-term viability of projects, and it's part of the sustainability agenda, and it needs to be integrated and mainstreamed, and mainstreaming this is one of the things that we've been focused on. I hope that wasn't catcalling and just an echo, but can people still hear me all right? Great, thank you. Now, ADB committed to fully align our sovereign operations with the goals of the Paris Agreement by the 1st of July, 2023. And in non-sovereign operations, that will be 100% by 1 July 2025. And we've developed internal guidance notes, which basically go by sector, looking at operations to assess the alignment with the Paris Agreement based on the common methodology developed by the MDBs, which Mike alluded to. To achieve this, ADB has followed the MDB methodological framework, which consists of the 6 core areas that are known as building blocks. And, at the risk of repetition, I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about this over the course of the conference, but basically looking at building block 1, which is alignment with mitigation goals, building block 2, alignment with the climate adaptation and resilience goals, building block 3, which is accelerated contribution to the transition through climate finance, building block 4, which is engagement and policy development support, building block 5, which is reporting, which is, again, to go back to the point about what you don't measure doesn't matter. You've got to have the metrics, and reporting is key. And then building block 6 is aligning internal activities. So building on the MDB PAA framework, ADB has been developing approaches for all 6 of these building blocks, including, but not limited to, the following main elements. First of all, enabling DMCs to deliver on their contributions to the PA, mainstreaming DMC's climate strategies into ADB operations. And again, I feel like, we're all in violent agreement here, mobilizing finance. This is absolutely critical because I guess, we have to face the reality that as ambitious as our programs are, as proud as we are of our ADB enhanced commitment of $100 billion that we announced last year, we all know that the answer and what's needed in climate finance is not in the billions, it's in the trillions. And if you look at the scale of the numbers that was announced by Mark Carney, last year in his GANS initiative, it's I think it was like 130 trillion units needed. We need a couple of trillion a year. I mean, for the foreseeable future. So there is no way that money is going to come from the public fiscs of our DMCs or even our donors. It's certainly not going to come from the balance sheets of even the World Bank and all the MDBs rolled together and multiplied by 10. It's going to have to come from the private sector. And so one of the things that is critical for us to do, and Mike, I'm sorry, I'm just repeating everything you said because we're in violent agreement, but it's only going to come by catalyzing that private sector investment, which of course includes all the things that we're doing to improve the legal environment for investment, to improve transparency, to improve rule of law, and certainty, and those things that will attract the private sector capital, which is needed here. So in mobilizing finance, we've been assessing the alignment of ADB's new operations with the PA and selecting and designing operations that are Paris aligned. And we're also currently developing guidelines for assessing and reporting the carbon footprint of ADB's whole project portfolio. Under these guidelines, the absolute and relative net GHG emissions of all the new process projects supported through ADB loans and grants will be assessed. And to some extent, this is prospective because there's some data issues with doing it on already approved projects, but going forward, this is going to be the approach. And I think that will provide more of the data and the granularity that's needed, to measure success. And the more measurement you have of success, I think the more clear the requirements are going to be. And again, that just makes it all the more easy to set expectations and to attract private sector capital. ADB is also aggregating reporting relative to those emissions, and we're planning to utilize the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials or similar methodologies to improve the disclosure on financed emissions. On this one, I think we're a little bit behind EBRD, but we came out with our first TCFD report, which is I think a critical watershed to make sure that we're giving more disclosure in harmonized formats. Obviously, the TCFD is something that a number of private sector institutions have been doing for years, and I think this will become increasingly important for our donors and investors to look at to see the impact of their donations and how it affects the carbon footprint of our portfolio. In terms of climate PBLs, what we call our policy-based loans, use of policy-based loans to enable comprehensive reforms are important, where we can actually provide support that's contingent upon certain policy developments in the climate space. Now, it's also time to think innovatively. So as much as we have a number of tools and modalities that have been time tested, we need to think outside the box, given the magnitude of the challenge. And so it is a time for innovation. And we're looking at blended finance. We're looking at new financing arrangements and platforms, new ways to employ our convening and leveraging power. And again, to attract that private capital, we're looking at how we can be innovative. We've announced our ETM, our Energy Transition Mechanism, which is an innovative structure to secure financing for the early retirement of coal, which is, of course, one of the most damaging GHG-emitting fossil fuels. We have an innovative finance facility for climate in Asia and the Pacific, which is creating an innovative way to incentivize financing through guarantee structures. And we're also looking at a revision to our ADV energy policy of 2021, which has come out, and it's aligned with the Paris Agreement's imperative to make finance flows consistent with a pathway toward low GHG emissions and climate resilient development. In all of this, I think it's fair to say that alignment with Paris and under the energy policy of ADB, that alignment is absolutely critical. It's going to help DMCs work toward a just transition that addresses the dislocation and adjustment costs and takes into account the creation of the very significant work that's been done, and also is going to fundamentally, again, going to the point of building that social consensus, it's going to create decent work and quality jobs in the clean energy space that are consistent with national development priorities. So I think a little bit of a long answer, but I think those are the ways that ADB is looking at aligning with Paris and getting to net zero, using and improving the current structures we have and building on, I think, a lot of the work that has been done in common with the MDB. Maybe I'll just, in closing, say just a couple of very quick things about some launches that we're doing right there at COP27. ADB during COP27 is launching several flagship initiatives, including the Asia Pacific Water Resilience Initiative, which will promote resilient water management in the region, as well as the Blue Pacific Finance Hub, which aims to restore ocean health, build coastal resilience, and develop sustainable blue economies. And again, it's seeing that intersectionality between, dealing with ocean pollution, preserving biodiversity, and helping the climate. And ADB will also launch the Just Transition Support Platform to help strengthen our work in the just transition space, which seeks to ensure, again, the benefits of the shift to low carbon are shared equally with no one bearing an unfair portion of the burden. So those are some of the exciting things that we're seeing, and we know with our many partners, including EBRD and other MDBs and the many others who are there in Sharm El Sheikh. It's an incredibly important time. I'm sorry, again, I can't be there with you, but let me stop there. I'm very happy to take questions. I know time is short, but thank you again for your attention and for inviting me to this terrifically important session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was a second tour de force. That was absolutely terrific and so interesting. Peter, we do have some questions. I have a lot of questions, but they may have to wait for another day because I don't want to run into the next session. So Peter Lallis, I think we'll turn to you before we take questions. And if we get time, Mary Claire might let us squeeze a few in. So Peter's at the Green Environmental Facility Secretariat, advisor to the CEO there, and also their Conflict Resolution Commissioner, which is interesting stuff. Again, previously with the World Bank inspection panel, we like a compliance guy on our panel here, and providing an independent forum for people and communities to raise concerns about environmental and social impacts of projects funded by the World Bank. So really important to bring him in to this conversation, because as is their mandate, Michael and Tom have focused on the money, the hard cash, which needs to get to where the projects go, but noting, of course, that they need to do so in a financially, but also social and environmentally sustainable manner. But Peter, on the other hand, is at that front line of the social and environmental impact concerns. So we'd love to hear from you, Peter, on this decarbonisation process from your point of view.
Very good. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me all right. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you. And thank you very much, Wendy, for that nice introduction. Like others, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the host government and the co-sponsors and the co-chairs for this really great event and the chance to be here. I'm deeply honored to participate and also to listen and learn about the ideas and ways to in this fight to accelerate action to net zero. So in my remarks, and as Wendy was just mentioning, let me highlight a few priorities and opportunities in the work of the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, to support this ambition for net zero and touch on some of these topics. As you might know, the GEF is a financial mechanism to support implementation of several global environmental treaties, including the Climate Change Convention and the Paris Agreement. We're a child of Rio, the Rio Earth Summit, created in the early 90s. And over the past 3 decades, the GEF has provided some $22 billion in grants and some blended finance. And we've mobilized another $120 billion in co-financing to support more than 5,000 national and regional projects. And we have a small grants program which works directly with communities where we financed, 27,000 community-led projects for the global environment and for local needs, trying to match them together. On one level, we can say it's made a lot of difference. In the energy sector, GEF has been supporting a massive expansion of renewable energy, very aggressive action on energy efficiency at many levels, replacing fossil fuels with zero emission alternatives and a shift to low carbon materials. And we have a big emphasis on a circular economy approach, trying to foster that out there. We also finance a range of other interventions to address the climate crisis, including climate smart and sustainable food systems. We have programs to fight deforestation and on degraded landscapes. We work on the CBIT, the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency under the Paris Agreement, and many others. And we're guided by core policies that reflect the values of the partnership and connect our work more closely to communities, including a stakeholder engagement policy, a gender equality policy, recognizing the crucial role of gender equality in the fight for the global environment, and a number of others. But, taking a step back, as we see, it's just not enough. It hasn't been enough, not nearly. The trends all around us, as we've been talking about, are showing the staggering impacts of climate change and the loss of biodiversity and the rising threats to the land, to the sea, and to all of us. So with this backdrop, and let me just go on a little bit about this, with this grim recognition, we just have worked intensively negotiating with donor countries, recipient countries in our replenishment. It's called the GEF 8 replenishment for the GEF Trust Fund for the next 4 years. And we did get the highest level ever of funding in the GEF Trust Fund of $5.3 billion. With a co-financing target of 7.1 to try and amplify that funding amount. I want to just mention 2 priorities of the replenishment. The first is, and Tom was touching on this, is that a priority focus on integrated approaches for transformational change to try and tackle what the science and our eyes tell us are interconnected challenges. So much of the GEF 8 programming work, this funding, these grants, will be delivered through 11 integrated programs, which seek to address multiple environmental threats at one. I just want to mention a couple very quickly. One of them is called Net Zero Nature Positive Accelerator integrated program. It's a lot of words, actually, but it's directly focused on net zero and nature protection, trying to bring those together. And it will support investments in new technologies in key sectors, sustainable land use and conservation, nature-based solutions, which people are seeing as rising in importance to make sure we can use the land to help us, heal what the impacts that are out there. And also aligning sectoral policies across sectors to support deep carbonization. We're launching this now as we speak. There are a couple of actually several other GEF programs that have a focus on integration and dealing with interrelated challenges. One was touched on. We are financing a sustainable cities program, which, having many different potential benefits for the global environmental challenges. We have a sustainable forest management program with a focus on the forests in the Congo Basin, the Amazon, and other forest landscapes. And we have what I think is a very wonderful program called Inclusive Conservation, where we partner with indigenous peoples and indigenous communities around the world in support of their longstanding work to protect the land and the resources. The other priority I want to mention is kind of getting to the governance and legal side of things a little bit more, is we are working strongly and expanding our efforts to help strengthen enabling environments at the national level, legal and institutional enabling environments, which experience amply shows is crucial to translate good project ideas into durable results that last, scale outward and upward for the future. And I just want to mention here, one of the things we want to really put a focus on is this idea of policy coherence. Aligning the left hand and the right hand in a way. In the net zero integrated program, a central feature is elimination of subsidies to non-Paris aligned technologies and practices. So the idea is to try to knock away nature negative incentives, and it also generates new fiscal space for strategic spending for climate compatible and environmentally positive investments. We also are going to work on this outside of programming through a new country engagement strategy where we will finance and support South-South exchange. The GEF has a real ability to convene meetings, workshops, and regional gatherings to exchange practices. We're going to support practical tools like payment for ecosystem services to try and join national priorities with the global environmental agenda. And the last thing I want to mention is another governance point. We're working at the international level to cooperate with the Green Climate Fund. And this is, let's say, an idea of cooperative governance. Because we're both in it, we're both there giving funding and financing to deal with climate change and interrelated global environmental problems. So we want to combine resources and actions. So we just developed a memorandum of understanding called a long-term vision for cooperation. And we want to be complementary and help recipient countries and people. So the system is as simple as possible, and we each know what the other is doing so we can work together. And we actually, of course, partner very much with EBRD, ADB, they're GEF partner agencies. So there's a partnership is a key word at the GEF. I'd just like to say, as we launch GEF 8, we'd like to reach out to colleagues and all of you. It's a pleasure to be here, and there's a lot to work on together. So we really hope we can do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm going to leave it to Douglas to say thank you to everybody. That was so helpful. We've got a wonderful question in the Q&A, which I would love to hear answers on, but we've been given an extension to 37 minutes past, and we are 37 minutes past on the dot. So with my thanks, handing over to Douglas to do the formal closing out.
Okay, yes, thank you, Wendy. And I want to say thanks to all the panelists who gave us a very stimulating and, as I said, wide-ranging perspective of getting to net zero. While if anybody is in Egypt, I would ask you to visit the GCF and the GEF booth, because we both share the same booth, and that's an evidence of us complementing each other and not having a kind of silo mentality. I think this has been a wonderful panel. There's a lot to digest, and I look forward to looking at the videos at my own time, at my own pace, and further digesting some of the treasure trove of information which came out here this afternoon. Thanks all, and have a pleasant time wherever you are.